It is my pleasure to welcome you to Leading the Virtual Team. Our guide today is Jim Bono. Jim is a master facilitator and vice president with Bluepoint and has 20 years of business experience ranging from an engineer working directly with clients to an organizational leadership role at a Fortune 500. For the past 10 years, Jim has been focused on leadership development. He is a certified coach and has a master's degree in leadership and consulting. Welcome, Jim.
Thank you very much, John. Nice to be here. I appreciate you opening up our session today, and I'd like to add my welcome to everyone as we begin looking at our webinar today on leading the virtual team. Now, I know when I say that we're leading a virtual team, many people think about the challenge and really the tyranny of leading people at a far distance and leading people in many different time zones. And in fact, you see the image on the screen there is an escalator. And it reminds me of sometimes people are hesitant to get on the escalator. You ever see that at the airport? You see that person's just not ready to get on the escalator yet, and yet the escalator is continuing to move. Well, the same things happen whenever you are put into a leadership role of a virtual team. Sometimes leaders are hesitant to step onto that virtual team leadership. They're worried about leading people across distances. They're hesitant about working across time zones. But your hesitancy doesn't help the fact that the escalator is still moving. Your business is still moving. And if you're a leadership team, not only is the business moving, but you are impacting those around you. And one of the things that we know that happens in virtual teams is that sometimes our greatest asset, our people, feel lost. And we have lost team members who feel like they're out there on their own, working as lone wolves, unable to collaborate with the people that they work with. These offer you the opportunity to lead this virtual team, to create something new so that you don't have a lost team member. Instead, you have a highly effective virtual team. Now, if we think about the virtual teams, I'd like to start off by putting out 4 characteristics of the highly effective virtual team. People that are working from distributed locations all around the world, just like all of you are connected today from distributed locations all around the world. But when it comes to a work group, these are the characteristics of that highly effective virtual team. Number 1, great ideas that benefit the entire business are continually generated, welcomed, and implemented regardless of one's location. Team members feel that they can provide value, that they have a say, that they can bring those new ideas to the business regardless of where they're sitting or how they're hooked up technically to the business. The second characteristic of that highly effective virtual team is that each member feel like that they can make significant contributions to the work of other members on the team. Quite frankly, at Bluepoint, we do this all the time. We have a designer in Vancouver, a facilitator in Texas, an operations manager in Toronto, and yet all of us are able to significantly contribute to the work of others. The third characteristic of that highly effective virtual team is that the individual team members measure their success primarily by their contribution to the team goals. They don't see themselves as a lone wolf. They see themselves as part of something bigger. And they know that their measure of success is contributing to that bigger. And the fourth characteristic of highly effective virtual teams is that the team continually looks for marketplace opportunities and challenges. They quickly make shifts as a unit that maximize that competitive success. It's actually a great advantage to have a virtual team. You have team members spread out in different markets, in different parts of the world, able to access your customers and those unique customer needs from where your team members sit, not from a central location. And we need to be able to tap into that as leaders to create these highly effective virtual teams. Now, this sounds great, and this is our goal, is to strive for those characteristics, but we have some challenges to overcome. And in fact, in our research at Bluepoint, in terms of the 4 biggest challenges that we face as leaders who are leading virtual teams, we see these. The first is this. Somebody out there connected at a home office in California says, well, I'm a lone wolf. I'm going to work on my own. I don't really need everybody else, and I'm going to focus on just what needs to happen for me. And I kind of feel like a lone wolf. I don't feel like connected to the other folks. The second challenge of leading a virtual team is some team members feel out of the loop. They don't think that they're connected to the key communication that comes from what they perceive as the center of the organization. The fourth challenge is that team member that says, look, my work is my work. I'm an independent worker. I'm on my own out here in New Mexico, and I need to just focus on the things that I need to do, and everybody else can collaborate. And the fourth challenge of leading a virtual team is that team member that says, well, I've got a manager, I have someone that assigns me work, but I don't really have a leader. I don't feel connected to a greater cause, and I don't have a leader that's helping me understand what is my connection to that greater cause and that greater purpose. Now, as I've listed these four big challenges, you may see yourself in some of these, or may see your team members in some of these as well. And many times, if we're facing these challenges, it looks like we're staring straight into the eyes of that lone wolf. The challenge that we have to overcome as we are leading this virtual team. And the question that all of us have as leaders who are leading virtually is this: how can I lead effectively when I'm not breathing the same air as my team members? So many of us grew up with the idea of working in the same building, sharing an office, having somebody right on the other side of the cube that I can throw something over to. That is not the reality of the 2016 workforce, and certainly beyond. So what we at Blue Point have come up with are four key dimensions of how you, as leaders of virtual teams, can create those characteristics of an effective virtual team by taking on four big ideas, four specific dimensions that will help bring that virtual team to life. You need to look at developing this team not to just be a work group, but to be a community. We need to look at our communication. How are we using different forms of media and communication, and what are we doing as a part of those communication? We need to think about how we collaborate across the distance. Just because I've got a team member in Toronto and Vancouver and Mexico City and Tokyo doesn't mean that those people can't collaborate and work on a shared project in order to accomplish customer goals. And finally, as an individual leader of a virtual team, you've got to look at how you engage your individual team members to get the most out of them, to help them be most productive. And we believe that adopting a stance of coaching can be very helpful in that way. Now, in this webinar, I'm going to go through each of these four dimensions of leading a virtual team. I'll provide you a few practices that you can adopt so that you can bring these dimensions to your leadership. And then we'll talk about how this can really begin to bring you to those characteristics of a highly performing virtual team. Let's start with the idea of community. And the question a lot of leaders ask who are leading virtual teams is this: how can I develop a purpose-driven virtual team, a virtual work group that can come together to share that common purpose? Now, many of us participate in online communities. We join groups that we share similar hobbies. I'm part of a musicians group because I'm a musician. I've got an uncle that's part of an online community that shares barbecue recipes. We know these communities are connected, but they're not really communities. They're interest groups. We have a shared interest, but we don't take on those characteristics of what it really means to be a community. So as we lead a virtual team today, what we need to think of is, well, what is a community that we're creating at the workplace, and how can I, as an individual leader, support the development of this idea of a community? Now, when we look at a community in a virtual work team at Bluepoint, we think it's defined by these three areas. First, that the people see a common purpose. They understand the purpose of this team, the purpose of the organization, and how they fit in. Secondly, the individuals are committed to the work that they're doing. They want to create the best work possible. They want to offer the highest value to their clients. And third, these individuals are committed to each other. They care about each other. There's an emotional bond that's built between team members that are distributed all over the world. Now, as a leader, you can begin to generate that kind of feel by taking advantage of some of the practices that we'll talk about in a moment. Now, to look at this community in just a little bit more detail, I like to think of a work group or really individuals that have integrated activities. They have some transactions that they have to pass and back and forth, and those transactions may go from Rome to Beijing and then over to New York City, but they're not necessarily committed to the work. But when we have a team, when we formed a team together, you can feel the commitment of all the team members to the work that they're doing together, to the common goal of the organization. However, to get a community, there's got to be that commitment and connection to each other. There's got to be a true care for the other individuals that are in this distributed group. A care for how their life is, how their work is. Are they accomplishing the goals that they need to accomplish for themselves and for the organization? Now, as a leader of a virtual team, you can create that kind of environment, create that community by adopting a few simple practices. And you can see them on the screen now, and I'm going to talk about each of them in detail. Now, these practices include crafting a bigger story, investing in the process of working virtually as a community, and then honoring the person. Now, let's talk first about the virtual team's big story. As a leader of a virtual team, it is your responsibility and opportunity to bring this team together and to let them know who we are as a team. What is our purpose? What is our mission? What is it that we all care about? And where are we going? What does the future hold for our clients, for our business, and for us as contributing members to that business? To help the team understand their team story, you've got to understand why we do what we do, connected to that common purpose. Now, for many of us, we think, oh, people should know these things. I don't need to tell them these things. But actually, more often than not, they don't. Remember, you've got that lost team member, that person that's sitting out there someplace in India, wondering how they're connected to this larger work team. You need to remind them what is special about us as we collaborate across these distances. Now, that's the first thing that you can do as a leader to help this work group see themselves as a community. Now, the second thing that you have to do in order to move this work group to a virtual community is to recognize that we are virtually connected. And we really have to look at how we are working together virtually. This is one of the opportunities I see in many organizations today, is that people know that they're connected virtually, but we don't actually invest in the virtual team process. We need to recognize it. We need to recognize that when we have a team meeting, we're pulling people together from 8 or 10 different time zones around the world. Now, as you begin to recognize that, you need to talk about it. And you need to see what is the impact of those people on the other side of the world having to manage their schedule to your schedule as their leader. And you think, well, I'm the leader of the team. Everybody should meet when it's noon in my time zone. But is that really investing in the team process and thinking about how you can most effectively pull people together? And then, of course, you've got to work on that process. We must continually revisit, how are we doing as a virtual team? Are we sharing stories? Are we staying connected? We must continually nurture ourselves and nurture the team process so that we do feel like a community that is caring about the work that we do and certainly caring about each other. And that really brings me to the third point of what you can do as a leader to help develop that virtual community. It's to help every individual understand what is their role in the big story of this organization. Look, you've got individuals located all over the world. Do each of these people know the difference that they're making for this team? Quite frankly, at Blue Point, this is one of the things that we want to nurture continually, because the webinar that you're looking at today was created by amazing individuals all over the world. From Ashley in Vancouver, who creates our beautiful formats. Now, these aren't actually pictures of these people, but I wish I had a picture of Ashley here. Or John, who's also in Vancouver, who's handling our technology today. Greg over in Point Roberts, who helped contribute to the content, as well as Joan, who's in Long Island, New York. We have folks in Toronto as well. Bryn supports all of the work that we do at Blue Point. Those individuals are important to our process, and we always want to honor and care for each of these people, not only for the work that they do, but for the people they are. And it takes that kind of care and nurturing to create this virtual community out of a work group of people that are spread all over the world. Now that gives you the idea of how you, as an individual leader, and all these people working together, can begin to approach that leadership of your virtual team. Now, the second dimension that I would like to look at, and we look at our model for leading virtual teams, is the dimension of communication. We need to ask ourselves, how are we sharing information? How are we sharing insights? How are we sharing innovations that really will create extraordinary alignment in the team, regardless of where individuals are located? You know, the reality is, when we think about communicating virtually, the farther away from the center we feel, the more likely we are to either be ignored or to ignore others. Now, when I say farther away from the center, I'm not necessarily talking about from the center of the corporate headquarters, because that center of communication on a virtual team could be someone that's connected in Long Island and somebody that's connected in Brazil. And they work so much, they've got great connection, but me, located in California, I feel like I'm far away from that center. So what communication tools are available so that people feel like the center is accessible by everyone? You know, some of the things that we think about when we think about leading a team virtually and how we are setting up our communication, first off, providing folks universal access to information and a common scoreboard so they can see how the team is doing and how the organization is doing. This has been incredibly helpful for us at Blue Point to use that cloud technology to be able to share and communicate across the cloud regardless of time zone and regardless of location. Now, in our communication, we want to provide imagery, metaphor, and story to help people get connected beyond facts and figures. One of the key attributes of leadership communication is that we appeal to the emotion center of the people that we work with. That's called the limbic system. And that emotion center is often appealed to by telling stories of client success, by using images that appeal to individuals and bring out their care, and certainly metaphor to help people understand the idea that we're getting across. Just like the metaphor of the escalator that I used this morning. It's just another way to move beyond the facts and figures to really help others see themselves in the communication that you are providing as a leader. And certainly that third big idea when we're communicating to the virtual team is for us as leaders to shift from providing information to influencing performance and alignment. And the reality is, our job as a leader is to influence the team members to that vision that we are providing for the team. If we're just providing facts and figures, they may not be able to see themselves in that vision. So how do we really work to influence the others by showing their role in the business, and really everything that we've talked about when we're talking about creating that big story for the community. Your communication, regardless of the media that you choose, whether it is PowerPoint, whether it is WebEx as we're using today, whether it is Skype, your opportunity to influence through that medium is present every time you gather the group together. And let's talk for a moment about the medium. It's a very famous quote here, the medium is the message. Now, if you think about what that really means for a virtual team, if we're trying to provide a message of customer experience or the vision that we have for our team, and we just provide it in a series of bullet points, and we don't engage through a medium that lets them see the products that were created, the outcome of the work that we're doing. If we just throw together a few things for a team meeting and don't spend nearly as much time on that as we do on our customer-facing work, what are we saying about the value of that communication to our team members? Well, we're saying you're not really worth us putting together a dynamic piece of communication like we would do for our customers. We'll just do this for internal only. Well, what message does that send? We need to remember that every time we communicate to our team members and in every facet that we're communicating to them, the medium is the message, or at least a good part of it. What is the medium that you're choosing, and how are you choosing to present yourself to those distributed team members? Now, that's the second dimension of leading virtual teams, which was communication. And here we are back at our four-part model, really looking at these four dimensions of leading virtual teams. The next area that I'd like to dive into is the idea of collaboration. What do we do as virtual team members when we come together? And the question we often ask is this: how do we create highly effective cross-functional partnerships virtually across the distance instead of just throwing something over to the person sitting in the cube right next to us? One of the things I'd like to challenge each of you on is, what do you do when you come together as a group? You know, very often the default agenda that many organizations go to when they all get on a call, or they all get on a WebEx, or they all get on Skype, is the information round. Everybody going around sharing the status of their work, talking about what's been accomplished, what needs to be accomplished. Well, you might remember in the communication module, I talked about providing that shared information and common scorecard. We believe that there are too many tools available today to communicate status that can be looked at individually, so that when we come together as a group, interactively, working and talking together, we need to look at the opportunity here is to work together, not just to share an information round of a status that's being done in the work. So to collaborate as a group virtually, the three things that we like to think of are, first off, creating temporary partnerships. There are often different talents in this virtual team. And how can you leverage those different talents to create some partnerships so that you have that excellent designer that's located in Des Moines, Iowa, connect with the salesperson who happens to be located in Miami, Florida, and support on a temporary partnership the graphics that that person needs to have. Encouraging and fostering ideas, another part of that online collaboration. Many of the tools today allow you to gather together as a group, as we are, and then to break off into smaller groups where you can accomplish specific goals. And as a matter of fact, in our virtual learning at Bluepoint, we do just that. We provide opportunities for large groups to talk together, and then small groups to be able to work together to learn and to foster ideas. The technology allows you to collaborate on the actual work, not just sharing a status update. And when you do that, we get the opportunity for number three, to facilitate virtual innovation, to find a way to come up with new approaches to our customers' challenges, new approaches to the processes that we do as an organization. Again, doesn't matter where we sit, because these new tools allow us to collaborate both in small groups and in large groups. And I tell you, this is one of the cutting-edge opportunities of a virtual team, is to recognize that we can move beyond IMs to collaborate. We can move beyond phone calls. We could get everybody on the same line and in 2 hours meet with 4 different sets of groups of all those people that are online and touch new products and new innovations that our customers need today. That goes well beyond the typical, tell me the status of your team and I'll tell you the status of mine. And I know many of you out there are nodding because you participate in those sessions. And so in our approach to leading virtual teams, it's all about collaborating on the work, not reporting out on a process. Now, as we continue on looking at these 4 key dimensions of leading virtual teams, so far we've talked about generating that team as a community, getting them to care about each other and to really understand their place in the organization. We've talking about you as a leader looking at your communication. What are you providing in terms of opportunities for people to get status updates individually so that when you collaborate, that third aspect of leading a virtual team, you're actually working on real projects, solving problems, coming up with fresh ideas together through these online collaborative tools. The 4th dimension of leading that virtual team is around coaching. When we think about coaching, we're really getting you as the leader of the virtual team to answer this question. How can you move past being an advisor or a supervisor and really become a performance coach for your individuals that are distributed widely across the world? You know, it is tough to be the boss on a virtual team. Now, what do I mean by the boss? Well, a lot of times when we think about the boss, we think about the person that's overseeing our work. It's the person that's checking in with us daily to make sure that we're on task. It's that person that is that authority that we're getting the work from. Now, if we put on our really old style hat of the boss, we think about, well, we've got to look after everybody and really make sure that we're holding everyone accountable. Now, as a leader of a virtual team, we want you to move away. We really invite you to move away from being that directive boss and instead thinking of the wide breadth of practices that you have available in order to get the most out of your distributed and virtual team and to be able to collaborate together to get better solutions for your customers. We look at the leading the virtual team continuum to think about these practices that we can do with virtual teams. At one end of the spectrum, we can be very directive. We need to provide those policies, the ethics. We need to set out the plans and the budgets and assign the work. Sometimes we're more of in an advisory mode. We're talking about past successes and how we can leverage those today. We're suggesting best solutions or telling others to try this. Sometimes in a virtual team, we do need to teach new skills. We do need to teach new approaches, new systems and processes. And finally, sometimes leading the team, virtual team, we can be more coach-like. We can come from a place of encouragement, really confronting gaps in performance while at the same time appreciating the good work that others do, challenging them to both broaden and deepen their knowledge of the organization, of the customer, and of the role that they provide. Now, for you as a leader of a virtual team, while you may have to touch on all of these, when I talk to individuals that lead in virtual teams, I encourage them to move over to the coaching side as much as possible. In the coaching side, you're building relationship. You're enabling independent thinking by those virtual team members. You're showing that you believe and value in them, and you're encouraging them to broaden their own capability by collaborating with others. You cannot be on top of every virtual team member across the world. micromanaging every bit of work that they do. I mean, we know that's not a leadership best practice in the same office, but if we think about a distributed and virtual team, we know that that is far from a best practice and not really feasible. So why not do what we can do as a virtual leader and really stay to that side of coaching, knowing that we're not looking after the individual pieces, we're looking after the person and what they are contributing overall to the vision of the organization. Now, 3 specific practices that you can adopt to be more coach-like in the leadership of your virtual team include these. First off, creating peer-to-peer relationships with the people that you lead. Recognizing that, yes, you are their leader, but you're also another team member that cares about the work, that cares about this client, and cares about that team member. Building relationship goes far beyond assigning the work. And that's what we talk about when we talk about coaching in the peer-to-peer relationships. The second aspect is to invite your team members to drive the conversation. Whenever I'm checking in with my virtual team members that are spread across the world, I want them to identify what they want to talk about. What is the agenda that you have? What is your list? And let's go through that list before I go through mine. That continues to invite the team member in regardless of where they're located. It ensures that they are taking accountability for their development and for the work that they're doing because they know that they need to create that agenda for the conversation that you're going to have with you. And then finally, focusing our conversations on maximizing their performance and their overall development. Again, you're not the boss that is checking in to see if work is being done. You are the leader coach that is encouraging and enabling a greater impact by that team member, by you adopting the stance of that peer-to-peer relationship and really inviting that team member into that broader and larger conversation. Now, these 4 dimensions, and of course, each of the 3 specific practices under those 4 dimensions are the targets that we suggest and that we use at Bluepoint to lead our virtual teams. And this page right here gives you a lot of information on the practices and each of these dimensions that you can nurture in your leadership within your organization. We're really talking about merging these 4 key dimensions into a single leadership approach to great virtual teams. Now, this is much easier said than done. And in fact, you may be looking at this model and thinking, well, which of these does come most naturally to me? Which one of these do I think I need to be more intentional about? How could I actually begin to create that bigger story for my team, for their community? Or how can I get folks to that place of collaboration and remove the check-in whenever we come together, but instead foster innovation virtually? What action steps will you take